All right, welcome back. So in this part of the tutorial, we're going to look at working with a slightly more sophisticated projectile weapon than we've looked at in any of our past tutorials. What I want to show you here is what I've done is I've just moved my first-person character to a part of the map that's a little better lit, so it's a little bit easier to see. But otherwise, it's largely where we left off last time. I also came in and added a reticle to my UI, and I increased the speed on my bolt from 8 to 20 so that it actually started moving pretty well. Now what this means is that when I play this, I want to start to show some issues. I'm going maximize on play here so that you can see. So you can see where my reticle's at. My reticle is right in the middle of my view. But when I get ready to fire that, then you see that the actual location that bolt lands is nowhere near my reticle, right? What this should be doing is hitting right where that reticle hits. Now the reason for this, of course, is that just like we talked about in earlier examples, is that when we were doing our raycasting, if we're shooting off of that spot, but our camera is in a different location, in this case, a little bit up here, then our camera is shooting this way and our crossbow is shooting a little bit lower and to the right. So what we want to do in this one is kind of a complex but powerful idea of mixing raycasting and velocity-driven rigid bodies. So the way that we're going to do this is we're going to build a raycasting mechanism that is always raycasting out from the camera. That when we're raycasting out from the camera, then it will store what is that we've hit, for instance right here in that raycast hit object that we call thing I hit or whatever we want. What we'll then do is we're going to make a launch point on the end of the crossbow that is always looking at that raycast hit point. And what we'll do then is that when we actually launch the bolt, we'll have the bolt launched towards what we're raycasting against instead of just straight out the end of the bolt. So let's look at building that off of our same weapon script. So I should be able to click on my crossbow script and start to build the mechanism from here. So let's come in and in the update, let's start building our raycasting mechanism. So I'm going to store a raycast hit that I'll call thing I hit, and then we'll start building the raycasting. So we'll say if physics.raycast, and then the location we'll go from is the camera, so we need this camera to know, or this object, this script to know. So let's make a public game object that we're going to call camera, and then we will raycast from the camera dot transform dot position, and then the direction we'll use is of course the camera's transform dot transform direction, and we'll use the vector 3 dot forward so that we have the direction, and then we'll store that in thing I hit. Okay, the actual thing that I hit there. And then most of that should be fine. So what we'll do is if we are actually hitting something, then we're going to have a launch point actually look at this. So let's just leave ourselves some notes here. So what we'll do is have launch point dot, well, let's go ahead and make it while we're here. So let's go ahead and make a public game object that we're going to call bolt launch point, that's set up there. So what we'll do is we'll have bolt launch point. We're going to use transform.lookAt, and we will look at exactly that thing I hit dot point. Okay, so that it's always looking right at that location. So all this is doing is if we are raycasting against something that has a collider, then go ahead and take that bolt launch point and make sure that it's looking at that object. So if I save and go back into Unity, Then we need to tie some things up. First, we need to identify who the camera is, which is that first-person character, which we'll go ahead and put right there. Now, second is let's come in and look very carefully at our crossbow here, because this is the location right here that we're going to launch that object off of. So we actually know that it's actually that dummy bolt that's sitting right there. So I'm going to make a new game object, an empty game object, that I'm going to call bolt launch point, and I'm going to make sure that that bolt launch point is, let's just make it a same child of this object. I'm going to make sure that we're at 0, 0, 0 there, and let's make sure that these are at 0, 0, 0 so that it's pointing in the right direction. Now this is going to be the thing that we're always pointing at, the things that we're raycasting against. So we'll come back down into our script holder. I'm going to make sure that that bolt launch point is plugged into there so that it will always be looking at it. And then we need to make sure that when we actually launch the bolt, that we actually launch it in the direction of the launch point. So let's come back in and look at our script. So when we do get fire up, we clone the rigid body, we instantiate that bolt, and we give it velocity. And right now what we're doing is giving it velocity along the dummy bolt's direction. All we need to do now is change this to use bolt launch point so that it moves forward. It points the bolt in the direction of the new launch point. Okay, let's save it and give it a try. So when we come over here to play, we'll go ahead and play. Now there's going to be some fall off to this bolt because it's got gravity on it. But what it should be happening is that's a little bit lower, but it's lined up with that. So let's say that we move that up to let's say 100, so that we're really giving it a lot of velocity. And what this should do is ping right where that spot is. So let's take a look. We'll hit play. And you can see that it's really firing fast, but right in the center of that reticle. All right. So what that will do is that this will actually make it so that as long as we're raycasting against something, then we're going to be actually raycasting against that spot. Now we're actually instantiate and aim at that place. Now this 100, a unit of 100, that's a real fast shot. Really difficult to see what's going on. While we have a little bit of extra time here, let's go ahead and we'll play with one more thing to set this up. Let's come into the bolt prefab. I'm going to come to the bolt prefab, and I'm going to add something called a trail render. So I'll add a component we'll call trail renderer. The trail renderer is a little bit of a strange thing. What will happen is that as I start to move this, you'll see this actual collection of polygons that it's building across the back. So it's a little bit strange to kind of work with this as we're working, but if you look up here on the width, then this actually shows the width of that trail render, and you can actually build more than one point on here. So I can add a key and let's say make that to be 0. So what happens is kind of the width there, and it kind of trails off at the end. Now what it'll do is you can make as many vertices as you want. I'm just going to leave it as it is for now. It's got a color. The problem is that the trail render also has to have a material. If it doesn't have a material, it renders as that strange pink, which is really not what we want. So we'll start to make some other materials here. Now to do this, you can really kind of build with any material. I'm going to go ahead and put it right in my crossbow, but I'm going to create a new material here that I'm going to call my trail renderer. Now there's a bunch of them that we can use, but we want this one to kind of be easy to see. See, is there an effects one? Oh no, let's not worry about any of those. Let's look at maybe an unlit one. You can play with these a lot. Let's say that I'm just working with a color, and let's say that I want to use a bright red color. That should be fine. Now what I'll come back in is look at the trail render component. It will ask for what the material is that I wish to use, so I'll go ahead and stick that there, though you could use actually multiple renders as you go. The other thing that I'm going to do is the default here on time is actually set to 5. That represents how many seconds that remains there, which means 5 seconds is way too long. So instead what I'm going to do is turn this down to let's say maybe 0.5. So what'll happen is if this is set at 0.5, then that trail render kind of disappears fairly quickly after it. Now, once you've got a color, you can do everything from once you got a material to say, look, I want it to go from red to let's say I don't know, yellow over the time. And you can start to tint what that trail render is doing. Although we're not getting a lot there, are we? Let's go ahead and come back to this trail render here, and I'm going to leave the color at white on the material there. And then let's come back over here, take a look, and we should start to see a little bit more. We're getting a little bit of emission there, so let's kind of pull that back and see what that does. All right, so I'm not going to worry too much about the color. You can see a little bit of it there, but there's a bunch more things that we could play with. What this will do now is that now even when we're shooting this pretty far and fast, it'll be a little bit easier for us to see it. Whoa, look at that. We got a bolt there. So we can start to see how these shoot off. All right, so it looks like this bolt, our dummy bolt, has a trail render on it. Let's get rid of it on that one. We just want it on the instance of the other one. And I'm going to go ahead, man, I should have made this a variable. I'm going to reduce that to say 50, and let's take a look. This should look a little bit closer to what we're after. So if I press play here, then as I fire that, that becomes a little bit easier to see what that thing is doing. You can see that right now the bolt, of course, is bouncing off of different things, which we, of course, wouldn't want it to do. We'd want it to destroy, or the case that we're interested in is that we really want it to, when it hits the bad guy, it actually does damage. So let's build that method in really quick so that we can actually do damage to the bad guy. And then we'll be close to wrapping it up. So the way that we're going to do this is I'm going to come back over to the bad guy, and let's take a look at how he's set up. So the bad guy is set up so that it has a capsule collider, which is going to be important to us because we're going to need to actually hit that, and the NavMesh agent. We're not going to worry about it, but the capsule collider is what's going to be important. Now, what I do want to do is make sure that this object is tagged as an enemy so that the arrow will know when it's hit an enemy. So I'm going to come in and let's add a tag here. The tag I'm going to add will be enemy, or here we'll call it wizard, because that's what we're doing. We're calling referring to things as wizard. So we'll come back, make sure that this is actually tagged as wizard. So now that this is tagged as wizard, we want to make sure that when the bolt hits it, it actually plays a new animation. So let's come in and look at the controller. Here's all of our sequence of walk, run, and attack. Let's go into the wizard assets and let's find, here's a good, okay, so that's a small hit. That'll be fine. He's a big guy. He can take small, arrows won't do a huge amount of damage to him. Let's come in here and we'll call this got hit small because it's just a small one. Let's go ahead, not loop it because we don't want it to loop indefinitely, but let's bake into the pose its rotation so that it actually is facing like all the rest of them as we go. So to get all of this applied, we need to start to bring this into the scene or into our animator. So I'm going to drag got hit small. up into the animator. Now there's a few things that I'm going to want to make sure and clean up. I'm going to start to be working with a trigger here that's going to trigger this particular animation state from any state. What it means is that I'm going to come in and in my idle state here, I'm going to make sure that is walking is set to true. You might not have anything there. Let's make sure that that is running is true, that works out, is attacking is true. And then we've got all of these. I'm looking at all of these, making sure that they all have a good condition. Now over here, instead of using a Boolean, I'm going to use a trigger to move from any state to the got hit small. So instead of making a Boolean, I'm going to come in here and make a new parameter called trigger that I'm going to call got hit. Let's see, let's rename that so that it's right. Got hit. Okay, so you'll notice that the symbol here is a little bit different. The idea of a trigger is that you trigger it once and then it automatically turns itself off. So what I'll do is from any state, literally I could be in any of these, what it will do is it will make a transition to got hit small. We'll make sure that the thing that does that actually is going to be the condition of, let's scroll on down here, to got hit. You see that it's not a true or a false, it's just simply a got hit. Now once I've gotten hit, I want us to go ahead and play this and then go ahead and start to give it some places to go. So let's make a transition there, we'll make a transition there, we'll make a transition here, and we'll make a transition here so that the character can go back to whatever it was doing after it plays the hit animation. So as it's moving here, we want to, the condition that needs to be set here is idling, although we're really not doing anything with the is idling in this case. Here we'll make sure that we will change this to is walking is true. Here we will change this to is running. And here, of course, we'll change this to is attacking. So once it's done playing it's got hit, it will go back to whatever it was doing based upon the Booleans that might have been set for it. Alright, so now what we need to do is write the script that makes sure that the bolt, when it hits our bad guy, that actually fires that trigger. So I'll come up into where my crossbow is at, and here I'm going to create a new script that I'm going to call bolt script. Now this bolt script is going to be pretty simple, stuff that we've looked at before. What it's going to do is just do a little bit of work as far as checking out what it's hit and then doing things based upon that. This is going to be on the bolt. We'll make use of the built-in on collision enter method. What we'll do is we'll say, look, when you on collision enter, check if the collision has a collider and check if that game object has a tag that is wizard. If this is true, then what I want you to do is go ahead and talk to that thing you just hit, which we know is tagged as wizard. And on that, get a component that is of type Animator. And when you're on that component, you can go in and set the trigger there of got, let's see, what was it? Got hit to be true. Now, it's not really set true, but we're going to trigger that got hit. Now, the last thing that we'll do is make sure that no matter what the bolt does, if it hits something, then we're going to go ahead and destroy itself so that the bolt isn't bouncing around in the scene. I know it'd be better if it like stuck into a wall and stuff, but that's kind of beyond what we're going to mess with here today. Okay, so let's go ahead and save that. We'll come back into Unity. When this compiles, I don't know what this assertion exception is. Hopefully yours doesn't do that. It actually doesn't break anything. You can just clear it and let it run. But now what I want to do is make sure that this bolt script is indeed on my bolt prefab. So I'll come in, add the component here of my bolt script. Now I've added it to this bolt prefab. Remember that the dummy bolt is actually also that bolt prefab. I need to remove it from that so that I don't have that script running on there. But I do need to have it on this bolt prefab here. So what this should do now is that when that bolt flies out, hits our bad guy that's tagged as wizard, then we should start to see him at least do that got hit. So let's take a look and see how it runs. When I press play, then I shouldn't have to wait for him to do anything. I should be able to kind of run over here and fire at him. And you see that got hit, and he goes back to So he got hit, got hit, got hit, so that he's doing pretty well. All right, so that got hit will work out, and then he'll go back to chasing me or attacking me, whatever he's doing. While we're talking about triggers, let's go ahead and build in the health system that will eventually kill him when we've hit him with enough bolts. So let's, again, same process. Let's go into the wizard assets here. Let's see, we've got a good death. And he falls on his back. Okay, that's perfect. So let's go ahead. Looks like I've already labeled that one death. No loop. Let's bake into the pose. That's going to be all fine. Okay, so I'll go ahead and bring this out into the scene as well, so that we've got the death. I'm going to create another transition from any state into death, because we should be able to kind of kill him at any time. And let's go ahead and make another trigger here called got death, or yeah, got death. That's a stupid trigger name, but it'll be fine. Okay, so we'll come down here to the got death, and here what we'll do is make sure that we turn that trigger on to got death, so that that goes there. And then what's really going to happen here is from here nothing else is going to happen, right? It's just gonna, that's going to be kind of the dead end. He won't kind of rise out of that in any way. Okay, so let's go ahead and build in our health system for our bad guy. So I'm going to come in and let's create a new script called Wizard Health. Our Wizard Health should look pretty familiar, should be pretty easy. This will eventually be attached to the character itself, and that becomes kind of important as we're building this. But let's come in and let's go ahead and create a integer called health. At start, let's go ahead and give this I don't know, let's give him a health of 30. Let's say it takes 3 hits to kill him. So we'll say that health is equal to 30 is equal to 30. And then we can start to build a public method that we're going to call do damage. This should look awfully familiar. All we do here is we say that health is going to be equal to whatever health was minus, let's say 10. So that each bolt that gets hit, that hits him, takes 10 off. Then what we'll do is check to see if health is less than or equal to 0, and if it is, then we want it to go ahead and play the death animation. Now remember, this script is attached to the character, so here we can just go ahead and go to get component. We'll go ahead and get the animator on this component. Here what we'll do is we'll set the trigger again, and the trigger was got death, okay, so that it does that. All right, so let's save that up. Let's go back over into Unity, compile. Make sure that Wizard Health is actually attached to the wizard, okay, to our character. So there's the AI and there's the Wizard Health that should be working. So after we get 3 hits, we should be shifting to death. Now the last thing we need to do once we've got all that tied up is we need to make sure that the bolt actually does damage. So because our wizard has a health, we just got to make sure that we're talking to that. So the thing that's going to hit it is the bolt. So let's look at our bolt script. Here we've got the got hit, but we also need to come in, and when it hits the wizard, what we're going to do is let's go and get that object and instead get a component called Wizard Health. When it gets that object, then it can do damage, and then no arguments there, and that should actually do the trick. Okay, so if we take a look here, let's go ahead and let it compile. Then when I come and let's make sure that we can just make sure that we see how this works. So I'm going to hit play. And now I can run up. Let's fire once. There he got hit. Twice. There he got hit. And 3. There he got hit. And there he plays his death animation. Okay, so you can see that he's indeed dead, and that's good, but he's got this kind of crazy floating above the ground. Let's fix that one thing really quick. Basically, that is going to be a pretty easy thing to adjust. Let's go into the death, and what we'll do is we want to start to bake in its position in Y. So I'm going to bake the position here. The original should probably be fine. Let's go ahead and click on play. On apply, and let's go ahead and play this and make sure he actually falls down. Now there might be some other things that we've got to clean up here, and we'll do that really quick. So there's 1 hit, 2 hits, 3 hits, he falls, and he's actually on the floor, right? So he should be set to go. Now what we would probably do is have some UI that would show how many wizards we had left in the game, and we need a start and an end. But at this point, you have all the tools in order to build this game. Pretty complex, so make sure you give yourself plenty of time. I can't wait to see it.